asked to speak initially because I'm going to give the big picture as quickly as I can, roll through some slides. So just to give you the big picture, nuclear power in the world, and then Chernobyl blew, and that was 1986. And that just put a damper on the growth of the industry, and it stopped. And then around 2011, and that was it. Germany committed at that time to phase out all their nuclear reactors, and many European countries said, no more, we're not. And the trajectory is ongoing. The industry is freaking out, and now they're, you know, nuclear reactors, but they're not small, they're not modular, because they don't even exist, they're just on paper, so it's a bit of a pipe dream. But what's happening around the world is lower cost renewables, which is taking over. So that, environmentalists might like to think nuclear is going downhill because of the growth of the environmental advocacy, but actually, I'd hate to say, I think it's because they can't compete with lower cost renewables. So while nuclear saw a decline last year of 1.7 gigawatts because they're soaring exponentially, and they now account for 30% of global power, but by 2028, that's only 4 years away, they will account for 42% of our power globally. And this is just has grown 1,000-fold. And this last bar on the right of 440 gigawatts, to give you a comparison of how much solar power capacity that is, in 1 year it was installed, 450 gigawatts in 2023 was installed around the world. That is 3 times all of Canada's grid. So what took Canada 100 years to build, wind, water, solar, nuclear, coal, gas, everything, it took us 150 or 100 years to build. In 1 year, the world installed 3 times that amount of solar power. So when people say, oh, solar can't do it, in fact, countries are going renewable, and solar is a good example, and wind is doing the same thing, same trajectory. So in come the federal government, and they're saying, well, we want to, and they're already giving all these various companies, they're mostly US, UK groups, they also have ties, these companies have ties with the the weapons industrial complex, the military industrial complex, that's what I was getting at. And, you know, they get $1.5 billion a year every year to Chalk River and AECL, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, to deal with decommissioning and waste. They got $1 billion loan to OPG to build. The government is, like, from the west to the east, provinces are jumping on this bandwagon. They, instead of rolling out renewables, they want to continue burning fossil fuels like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and New Brunswick. They're all fossil fuel provinces. They're conservative. They don't want to really do anything about climate change. They think they can use this false solution of nuclear power is going to save the day. And in the meantime, they continue to burn fossil fuels when really renewables are the alternative. So the United Nations meets annually, and the world's leading scientists say that we need to reduce emissions in half by 2030 in order to keep our emissions. Though, however, it takes 10 to 15 years to roll out, maybe even that's optimistic, whereas wind and solar take 1 year, maybe 2 years. So we could full out go wind and solar, close our gas plants in Ontario. Instead, what is Ontario doing? Ramping up gas and building new nuclear stations at super high cost. They're not clean. We're going to hear from someone about nuclear waste, accidents, and they're super expensive. This gives you an idea how expensive they are. The bar at the right at 24 cents is how much new nuclear costs. So while Ontario is about to build, like right now we have 18 nuclear reactors. Ontario wants to rebuild all our aging nuclear infrastructure and build new reactors. We already have the largest nuclear station in the world, the Bruce Nuclear Station, which is west of here. And they want to double the size of it. They want to rebuild all the reactors and double it with more reactors. So they're building out new reactors that's the most expensive option. Whereas wind, water, solar, so energy efficiency, import in Quebec, water power, solar, onshore wind, existing nuclear power, price of nuclear power in 27 to pay for the rebuilding of Darlington, offshore wind in the Great Lakes. We should have lots of offshore wind in the Great Lakes, lower cost renewable power, versus what the Ford government is doing is gas and nukes. More gas, more nuclear power. Climate negotiations in Dubai last year, the world committed to tripling renewable power by 2030, and just 22 countries, or did they say 2050? But the renewables by 2030, it gives you an opportunity to send a letter to the Premier saying, not wind and solar, not nuclear gas plants. Let's give that a go.
Well, I'm Michael Poellet with the Interchurch Uranium Committee Educational Cooperative, and I'm from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. And Saskatchewan is the world's second largest uranium producer. All of the active mines in Canada are in northern Saskatchewan. And Saskatchewan has a long history with uranium mining. It started in the early 1940s, and there the uranium was used basically for nuclear weapons. And that was the primary purpose for uranium until about 1965, when domestic uses for uranium came on board. We have, again, these active uranium mines as well as abandoned and decommissioned uranium mines in northern Saskatchewan, and therein lies the difficulties with it. If we take a look at our, for example, to guide our way through things, the Canadian Impact Assessment Act of 2019 said that in any impact assessment, there are 5 pillars upon which we would consider whether or not a particular project meets the requirements for a safe environment. And those 5 pillars are environmental, health, social, cultural, and economic. And if we look at that with regard to uranium mines in Saskatchewan, we find that all 5 pillars crumble. That indeed, uranium mining does not meet the requirements for any of these 5 pillars. However, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, which licenses these mines, has passed all the mines, licensed them, as well as license the decommissioning projects and everything there, which gives rise to my little saying, CNSC has never met a uranium mine it didn't like. And again, indeed, none of the mines have ever not been licensed by CNSC. Just a few things briefly on each one of these pillars in terms of where they don't meet the requirements. The most obvious one is in terms of the environment, that the kind of things that happens to the plants, the air, the water, the animals in the area, the environment is significantly affected such that after a uranium mine goes out of production, zones. And so therefore, environmentally, humans are warned to stay off, as well as animal friends have enough literacy that they can read the signs to recognize the dangers that are there on these decommissioned sites. There are some places, the Gunner mine, which is by Lake Athabasca, which was decommissioned, simply sweeps these tailings into the bay and is into the bay and has sedimented into the bay such that there is no way that anyone can go in neutralize the radioactivity that is there. And so again, for the First Nations people in that area who rely on the fish from that area of Lake Athabasca, they're just simply told, don't take any of the fish from that bay. Of course, the difficulty there is fish don't just simply stay in that bay, they go right all over the lake, and so one is never sure, are any of the fish really safe to eat? And that brings us into the health understandings of this. And just to look at the health situation with regard to people, for many years we have wanted to do epidemiological studies, both on those who work in the uranium mines and the communities there in the north. And we have been prohibited from doing so. The reasons given is that the sampling would be too small and therefore the data would not be accurate, and so we can't do any epidemiological studies. The industry uses that to their advantage by saying there have been no studies done which show adverse health effects for uranium mining in people in the north. Well, of course, if you don't enable studies, studies aren't going to give you that kind of evidence. Lumping together the social and cultural aspects of it, when these uranium mines come into the north, of course, it's devastating to the traditional lifestyles of the First Nations and Métis people there. It displaces hunting, fishing, trapping, collection of plants for medicines, for food, and for all of that. And it has a devastating effect there, as well as it's divisive within the community, because often the mining companies, in order to gain assent, will work particularly with the elected bands of a particular community, but they won't consult the entire community, so that particularly the elders that are there, who are far more opposed to these uranium mines and that, have no voice and nothing in the decision-making processes with regard to the establishment of these mines. And then, of course, the economic impact that is there is that most of the money from the mines, of course, does not stay in the community. It goes out of the community into corporations like Cameco, which indeed take the money, and it doesn't even say in Saskatchewan, they have a nice little system set up where they sell it to their own corporation established in Switzerland at below market prices, and then from Switzerland they sell their product on the market so that they can make a greater profit and don't have to come under royalties and taxes in Saskatchewan. The other economic impact on all of this has to do with the decommissioning aspects of it, the decommissioning of these mines is far more expensive than what is said in the impact assessment hearings about what a decommissioning might cost. Just one example, this is the Beaver Lodge mine. It's a legacy mine. It was literally abandoned in 1967. There were no efforts made for cleanup until the early 2000s. At that point, they thought that cleanup of that mine would be $26 million. They're not finished cleaning up yet, and so far the bill is $250 million and counting. So again, it's a tremendously expensive way to try to get energy to boil water. In closing, a few comments, a bigger overview about the way that this whole industry works. And I have a quotation here from John Valiant, who was the author of Fire Weather, The Making of a Beast. And the beast was what was titled for the fire that devastated Fort McMurray. And his book talks about the way in which big oil and everything, the industry works together, that indeed is responsible for these kinds of situations where you have that fire. A similar thing can be said about uranium mining and the entire nuclear industry. And Valiant writes in his book, "This behavioral dissonance reveals a glitch in human nature. It is a downside of our species' extraordinary adaptability that appears to be triggered by artificial abundance and exacerbated by the profit motive, which could be defined as commercial entitlement or greed. Once an arbitrary standard has been set for production, profits, and their attendant gratification, that expectation, however unsustainable, becomes the new baseline, and anyone attempting to revise it or even question it faces serious social and economic consequences. But this dogged loyalty to business as usual invites an extraordinarily expensive and destructive self-perpetuation machine. Narrow specialization and overdependence on a rigid status quo are lethal to species, industries, and civilizations alike." And I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm next. And Angela, you can do my slides? Okay, great. Can I stand on this side, or do I have to stand on that side? Okay, Susan O'Donnell. I'm in here from Fredericton, the Coalition for Responsible Energy Development in New Brunswick. And this, if you can kind of see, is a Google Earth shot of the Bay of Fundy in New Brunswick, and there's a point that comes out called Point Lepreau. And on that point is the only operating nuclear power reactor outside of Ontario. You want me here? Outside of Ontario, sorry, that's right in my eyes. Right outside of Ontario, and it's in New Brunswick. It's the only one in Atlantic. Okay. Right, so there are many links between nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons. I'm just going to be talking about one of them today, but there are many other links that we could talk about during question. There's one in New Brunswick that has raised considerable concern. So a little bit about how a reactor works. There's a uranium fuel bundle. As Michael was talking about, the uranium now all comes from Saskatchewan. It's put into a fuel bundle. It's put into, say, this Lepreau reactor. It's irradiated or fissioned for about 18 months. And during that time, the fissioning, it becomes loaded with something called fission products, which is broken pieces of uranium atoms, which happens when the uranium atoms are split, okay? What also happens during fission is there's a product called plutonium that's made. That's a byproduct of uranium fissioning. It doesn't exist outside of a nuclear reactor, basically. So during fission, the fuel with all of these radioactive products, it becomes millions of times more radioactive than the original fresh fuel. So you can actually handle the original fresh fuel rods. But when they come out of a reactor, they're so highly radioactive that the used fuel would kill any human being that is not heavily shielded within 20 seconds standing a meter away. That's how radioactive it is. Okay. So the plutonium, as I mentioned, is a byproduct of nuclear fission, and it stays, there's a small amount of it that stays in the used fuel when it's removed after the 18 months from a reactor. And the key thing to remember is because these used fuel bundles are so highly radioactive that they're deadly, there's plutonium inside it, but you can't get at the plutonium because you can't get close to it, right? It's so radioactive. And so as long as the plutonium stays in the used fuel bundle, you can't do anything with it. Okay, So it comes out of the reactor. This is actually a photograph of, once it comes out of the reactor, it's cool, the fuel bundles are cooled in water for 10 years, and then they're moved to what's called dry storage, and this is a picture of the dry storage at Point Lepreau. It's about 1 kilometer from the Bay of Fundy. There are these concrete silos filled with used fuel bundles. Okay, with tiny bits of plutonium inside. So it is possible to extract the plutonium from the used fuel bundle. It's currently not permitted in Canada, but it's certainly possible. And if you do that, it's called reprocessing. That's the next slide. So yeah, it's called reprocessing. And what reprocessing does is it makes that plutonium available because it takes it out of the radioactive protection, basically. All right. And then once it's extracted, the plutonium can be used to make new fuel. Pretty well any nuclear power reactor can be configured to run on plutonium fuel. Okay? The other use for plutonium, aside from fuel, is to make a weapon, a nuclear weapon. So you may know that in 1945, the US military dropped 2 bombs on Japan. The second bomb, which was the bomb in Nagasaki, was a plutonium bomb. It killed between 60,000 and 80,000 civilians, and about half of those people were killed in the first day, right? This is not plutonium, this is just a glass sphere. It's the exact size of the amount of plutonium that caused all that destruction in Nagasaki that I showed in the previous picture. So it's very powerful stuff, okay? So why are we even talking about this now? The controversy is that in March 2021, the federal government gave just over $50 million to a small startup company from the UK called Moltex Energy that opened up an office in St. John and applied for federal funding that says it wants to develop reprocessing technology at Point Lepreau, right? That's what they want to do. So what they want to do, this is Google Earth view of the Point Lepreau nuclear generating station. Here's the Bay of Fundy. About 1 kilometer away up there is the tops of the used, it's the used fuel stored in those concrete silos. That's the tops of the silos I showed you earlier. And what the Moltex wants to do is put a compound there with 2 units. The first one, they want to take the used fuel, they want to melt it down and extract the plutonium, turn it into new fuel, and use that fuel in their proposed small reactor. That's the whole plan. So the reprocessing unit is to extract the plutonium from the existing fuel and then use it in the new reactor. All right. So there's a lot I could say about that if you have questions, but the key point is, as I mentioned, it's just a small portion of plutonium. It's 0.6%, so less than 1% of that can be used to make new fuel. And what you get with the 99% is you get a whole bunch of new radioactive waste, new forms, not new kinds, but new forms of radioactive waste. It's liquid. There's many different kinds of streams. We don't even know what kind of containers can contain this stuff. It's never been done in Canada before. Lots of questions, and New Brunswick will be on the hook for looking after whatever happens there. Okay. So one of the problems with this is Moltex is calling this recycling, and this is how they're selling it. They're recycling the fuel at Point Lepreau without talking about the reprocessing or any of the dangers and concerns that come with extracting plutonium from used fuel. They just say, hey, this is a recycling project. Okay. So what happened is 2 months after the federal $50.5 million to Moltex happened, a group of U.S. non-proliferation experts in the U.S. got wind of this, and they wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, very concerned. These are very highly placed people who served under many U.S. presidents in national security positions. Very, very concerned about this Moltex project, okay? And I'm just going to give you a quote from the first letter that they sent. They ended up sending 4 letters. They said, by backing spent fuel reprocessing and plutonium extraction, the Government of Canada will undermine the global nuclear weapons non-proliferation regime that Canada has done so much to strengthen. So what do they mean by that? They have a couple of concerns. So the first concern is the only countries right now that do this reprocessing, removing plutonium from used nuclear fuel, are nuclear weapon states. And they use this for their nuclear weapons program. The country of Japan is the only non-nuclear weapons state that is planning. They're not currently doing it. They've been building a reprocessing plant for decades. And the concern is if Canada, which is, prides itself on the peaceful use of nuclear reactors, if it starts this plutonium reprocessing, it's going to send the wrong signal. And in particular, the country of South Korea, who's been wanting to do this same technology, they... Okay, thank you, Ken. South Korea wants to be a nuclear weapon state. They've been very open about this because of the situation with North Korea, which of course is a nuclear weapon state, but they can't do this unless they can reprocess used fuel, and so they want to do this. And so the fear is, and this is what the US experts are saying, if Canada does it, it basically will give a green light to South Korea to do it, and that's the first issue. Okay, the second issue is that Moltex wants to export its technology, and in fact in New Brunswick, you would know this, that this is being sold to the New Brunswick population, as this is going to be a new export industry in New Brunswick. We're going to be exporting these little reprocessing units all across the world. And if you look at their slide deck, they've got, how many we're going to sell to this country and that country, et cetera, et cetera. So they're basically, as some people have said, they're exporting the capacity to make nuclear weapons. And so, next slide, the obvious concern with this is that the project could facilitate nuclear weapons proliferation globally. So, next slide, we're almost done here. What the international experts are calling for, and we're calling for, is we want an international review. We don't have the capacity in Canada because we're not a nuclear weapons state. We don't have the people in Canada who understand nuclear weapons and really understand what's happening here. And so we need an international forum of nuclear weapons experts to come together, evaluate the Moltex project, and tell, parliamentarians and Canadians, what are the risks here? Should we be doing this? That's not happening, and that's the concern. Okay, there was a national ban reprocessing campaign that a number of us here were involved in. It was actually coordinated by Nuclear Waste Watch. Brennain is the coordinator of that group that ran for about 4 months. So we did have an impact in raising the profile of it, and it's still one of the things that we're talking to parliamentarians about this week. We want a ban on reprocessing, and we want this international review. Okay. So just in conclusion, I would say that we've done a number of access to information requests to find out what's happening behind the scenes. We can absolutely say that the government is misinforming the public by calling this project recycling. The government is well aware, not all the parliamentarians, but certainly the senior civil servants are well aware of the implications and concerns related to reprocessing, but they are not sharing this with the public. If you go on the websites, you will find nothing about this, only about the wonders of recycling used nuclear fuel. So that's it. There's my contact on the end, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Susan. So I'm Brennain Lloyd, and I work with Northwatch, and we're a coalition of environmental social justice groups in northeastern Ontario, but for the last couple of decades, since we were formed, we've also worked with groups and other concerned residents in northwestern Ontario around electricity planning and nuclear waste. Northwatch is a generalist group, so we work on mining, forestry, energy, pipelines, toxics, nuclear waste. But with the Northwest, we work on electricity planning and nuclear waste. And I'm going to try in 7 minutes, I was told I have, to talk about nuclear waste along the entire fuel chain. But I'm going to focus on the end point. So nuclear waste is generated at each point along the fuel chain. There's low level, intermediate level, and high level. So you start in uranium mines. Michael's talked about that. In Saskatchewan, we've got 200 million tons of radioactive tailings in the Elliott Lake Basin from mines that closed decades ago. The uranium then comes to the world's largest refinery, which is in the north shore of Lake Huron, just outside Blind River, Mississauga First Nation territory. And we have uranium coming not just from Saskatchewan, but from around the world to that refinery, and there's waste generated there. Then the waste goes to Port Hope, to the conversion facility. From there it parts ways. Some of it goes offshore, and when it goes offshore, it's going for fuel, but it's also going for weapons. And there is no traceability for uranium when it goes out of country. And I'll give you an example. Michael's friends in Cameco were boasting a few years ago. It was a curious thing to boast about. They were boasting about their sales to India, and they boasted about, part of their boast was the facility it was going to. And we know that that facility in Hyderabad is a combined facility that produces both weapons and fuel for civilian use. So there is no traceability. Then it goes to fuel manufacturing, more waste there. Then it goes to reactors. When it gets to the reactor, there's low and intermediate level waste, which are operating waste. Eventually there will be decommissioning waste, but there's what's called high level waste. And in Canada, even though some of the intermediate level waste is highly, highly, highly radioactive, some of it, like the refurbishment waste, is as radioactive as the fuel waste. But in Canada, we only call it high level if it's fuel waste. So, which is really misserves the conversation when we're talking about intermediate level waste. I'm going to talk just about the high level waste, just about the high level fuel waste, and the plan that the industry and government have for the transportation and burial of that waste. So this is a scheme that's been around in the US since the 1950s, in Canada since the 1970s. 3 men, 3 months studied the problem of nuclear waste and said, oh, we'll bury it. And industry and government have been on that track ever since. And they've gone, you know, the 70s, it was a site search, that failed. 80s, they developed a concept, Atomic Energy Canada Limited's concept to bury nuclear waste in the Canadian Shield at that point. The 1990s, it went through a hearing. The last day of the technical hearings, they completely switched what they call their reference case, their idea, their concept. That hearing went on for 8 years. The panel produced a pretty good report that said next steps should be taken by an agency independent of the nuclear industry. Federal government said, thank you very much. We accept your recommendations in principle, and created the absolute mirror opposite with the Nuclear Fuel Waste Act. They developed the nuclear waste they directed the industry to organize themselves. They did that as the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. They've done a siting process. Now they've developed another concept. After all these years, they still just have a concept, a set of ideas about how they'll actually carry this project out. And even though it's still at the conceptual stage, they can't describe it to the communities they've been studying, let alone to the rest of us. They are in the very cusp, after a 14-year siting process, they're on the very cusp of selecting a site. They put word out in 2010 through the municipalities to say, are you interested in learning more about the economic benefits of a $16 to $24 billion national infrastructure project? You don't hear the word waste, and you certainly don't hear the word radioactive, and you don't hear the word forever lethal in that invitation to learn more. But 22 communities put their hands up, and almost all of them, some of them were in the shadow of the Bruce plant, where there was already a hosting agreement and already money being given out for a different idea about burying nuclear waste. But all the communities in the north and 3 in Saskatchewan, they were all struggling economically. The mine was gone, the mill was gone, and they were in trouble, and they all went in, and they all learned, and they all got paid to learn. Years go by, they drop out one by one by one. We're down to two. The one in South Bruce, beautiful farming area, right at the site literally is on the Teeswater, encompasses the Teeswater River. The site in the Revel site in the heart of Treaty 3 territory in the northwest, stunning landscape, absolutely stunning landscape. It's at the height of land. Those are the two sites they're studying. They have already signed a host agreement with Ignace. That happened in March. And tonight, South Bruce Council is considering a hosting agreement for South Bruce. And I haven't looked at it as closely as the other one, but our friend Bill Knoll from Protect Our Waterways, who's been with us most of the week, has dived right in. Here are some of the things that are consistent. They both are about secrecy. Scientific and technical information cannot be shared by the implementation committee, the two people on the implementation committee, and the rest of the community. They are silencing the municipality. If it goes forward in this project, they cannot speak critically of the project from there on in. Even in the regulatory processes or the impact assessment, they have 45 days to review a document. These documents literally can be stacked this high. They'll have 45 days to review the application, get some comments to the NWMO. Anything that they don't mention in their comments, they can't raise again in the following proceedings. So they're absolutely silencing. And the NWMO retains the option to change the scope of the project at any point. And this is a project that goes forever. So we have a lot of concerns about that. They can change the type of fuel. They can change the size. They can change the length of operation. They can add a small modular reactor. And we've been concerned for many years about the potential for them to add reprocessing, the project, the kind of activity that Susan was just describing. So the project itself includes a number of steps. Extracting the waste from the storage containers in at the reactor site. Lots of problems with the waste, the way it's being managed at the reactor site. Literally no discussion about how that aging, some of it defective fuel, it means it's fuel that's releasing radionuclides. No discussion of extraction, then transportation. We know lots of risks about transportation, lots of concerns about accidents, but even without an accident, people along the route, people traveling beside the truck, behind the truck, workers in proximity to the truck will be exposed to low levels of radiation, and there's no level of exposure that doesn't have some attendant risk of harm. There are going to be 2 trucks a day for 50 years just for what they've generated so far. Then they get to the processing where they open this waste up and transfer it in air. It'll be in a hot cell, they say. Fine, no problem. Big problems, big problems. Some of the most contaminated sites in the world are contaminated by activities that have taken place within hot cells. So highly, highly, highly contaminating process. They'll be generating more waste, including liquid waste. Then they'll place it underground. And when they place it underground, the environment will be so highly radioactive that workers cannot be present. That's how hot the fuel will still be. They used to say they would keep it open for 300 years, which we assumed because that's how long it was going to take Yucca Mountain, a failed project in the US, to come down to temperatures that the waste would stay below boiling. And if it goes above boiling, then there's all kinds of issues with steam and additional corrosion issues and so on. But the short story is not even the industry says that the containers will last for the required amount of time. The containers will fail. So the debate isn't about will the containers fail, will there be releases? The debate is how soon, how much harm. That's what the debate is about. Industry says, a little bit over a long time. We're not confident of that. None of the containers have been tested. Even the transportation containers they describe in their little presentations. Both the industry and the CNSC describe them. They talk about the tests. It's a certified package. They have to go through these tests. It's a drop test, the puncture test, the water test, the thermal test. None of these packages, the only one they say is certified is one certified by Ontario Hydro. Wasn't Ontario Power Generation. It was Ontario Hydro in the 1980s, and they did an incomplete set of tests which were not fully successful on a half-scale model. That's the only actual testing of that package. They say it'll be safe. The other tests, the water and fire tests, can be substituted with computer models. And every step along the way, when you look at any part of their multi-barrier project, they say it's multiple barriers. Every one of those barriers, when you get to the deep geological stage, every one of them has the potential to fail, and the debate is, how soon? That's what the debate is. So, it has to be stopped. So neither the site, I work with We the Nuclear Free North, which is a Northern Ontario-wide alliance, and we work very closely with Protect Our Waterways, No Nuclear Waste in South Bruce. Neither of these sites is acceptable. No proponent in the world has yet demonstrated a deep geological repository to be safe. None of them have any operating experience. There's not one that's been licensed and open to operate, not one that's in operation. So the best we can do is improve storage at site, and there's lots of room for improvement at the reactor sites, and the reactor communities have been told the waste will go away. The waste can't go away. The waste must be contained more safely, with better monitoring, and better ability to actually measure performance and then mitigate the failures when the failures come. And I'm going to end by just saying, I've got a big note here in large font, plug the petitions. So we've got at our table back there, so we've got two petitions. One is an online petition that closes Friday at noon. And we've got a little slip of paper there to help you find it, or you can just go to We the Nuclear Free North, and it's the link at the top of the page. So please take that and go home, go on your phone, and sign that petition. And then on Saturday, but you've got a sneak preview here, we begin a paper petition that we'll be delivering in the fall. And the next 6 months are absolutely critical. And we really need the best support that we can get from everybody who is outside of these two regions. We're all at risk. So the transportation is going to come through Ottawa. So you're our partners in opposing this project, because it's not just the site of the deep geological repository where risk resides, it also resides along the transportation route. So thank you.
For all the speakers, thanks to each of the speakers. We're going to open it up for questions now. There's a mic back there that you can come up and ask a question. Anyone who'd like to do that?
Given the untested nature of the containment for this underground storage, what is the potential for it getting into the aquifer and hitting the Ottawa River, our water supply?
Or the nearest?
The nearest one, up river.
The Chalk River? Where's Ole? I think the potential, I don't think it's a possibility, it's a certainty, but where's Ole? Not on?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not really a hydrogeologist. I think the main concern is getting into surface water. The waste facility is open to the elements: wind, rain, snow melt, ice. So the plan is that they would build a water treatment plant, and that would remove at least some of the contaminants, and then there would be a pipe that would discharge the treated
Okay.
stuff into Perch Lake, which flows into the Ottawa River. So but we have concerns about how that water treatment plant would function. Because right now, there's a sewage treatment plant at Chalk River for the 3,000 workers that hasn't worked for 2 months. So if they can't run a conventional sewage treatment plant, can they run a radioactive waste treatment plant?
Okay, that was my number one fear. My second fear is this is going to be in some sort of truck that's going to go along the 417 and then up the most dangerous highway we have, up past Arnprior. And I'm very concerned about that. So if anyone has any comments about the transportation aspect. I understand you said the transport trucks were tested at half scale. They weren't tested at full scale. And I mean, we've had so many accidents on that highway going up towards Pembroke and North Bay and so on, that, you know, there's potential for just a highway accident. So I don't know if people are addressing that with the government.
So the transportation, there will be transportation. In this area, you'll have transportation twice, because you'll have the waste coming from Gentil 1, which is going to come to Chalk River in the short term, in the very short term, and they haven't disclosed. I don't know what containers that waste is coming in. Then in the longer term, in this area, you'll have the waste coming from Gentil 2 and from Point Lepreau, and that will be in what's called the basket container, or the basket case, you could call it. And that container is a concept, so they haven't yet actually developed the container that they will use for what they call the non-OPG waste. So the package, the container I talked about was a used field transportation package for the Ontario power generation waste. The other waste will be in this basket container, not yet designed, so certainly not tested, but we do know that the testing doesn't have to be actual real-world testing. They can substitute, despite the way CNSC likes to describe all the International Atomic Energy Agency tests as if they're actually done, they're not.
I have one more request. Before you leave, would you please take your plates and put them in the kitchen, which is the second door down the hall? Would you also, whoever's able to do it, stack the chairs in groups of 3s? Thank you, because two of us put out all the chairs, and I don't want to carry all the dishes back there. Thank you.
Those people will be rewarded with homemade carrot cake.
There's lots of nuclear power in Europe, which is much more highly populated. And we don't hear anything about problems of handling the waste. Are they doing something that we don't know anything about? Are Canadians reinventing the wheel on nuclear waste, on handling it? Or is it just as bad in Europe as it seems to be here?
So I can speak to the high-level waste. So there's a number of countries that have an idea of burying the nuclear waste. No country has yet done it. Sweden put in, their company there, SKB, put in an application in 2011, and it's been returned. It's been back and forth between the regulator, still hasn't gone to the final stage, still hasn't been approved. Finland has constructed the ramps underground for research purposes, put in a license to operate application a year and a half ago. It was supposed to take a year for the first review. That's extended to 2 years. So it's still under review. Switzerland has announced the site that they're going to investigate, but doesn't have even an application. France has announced the site, is in the early stages of application. The UK has abandoned their siting process 2 or 3 times now and is back at siting, but don't have an actual detailed plan. So they're all in different various stages. There is strong opposition in the UK and France. Switzerland will be subject to a national referendum, unlike the other jurisdictions. Finland, the opposition is harder to find. Sweden, a vigorous opposition. But I think the bottom line is that other countries, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, there's this weird thing in the EU that countries have to say that they will have a plan by 2050. So a number of countries have said they will have a plan by 2050 for a deep geological repository, but they don't actually have a plan and they're not actually pursuing it. That's the case in Germany as well. So they're all in various states of not at all close, except for Finland that the industry keeps telling us is close, but we'll see. So there are some failed repositories. The Assay mine in Germany was used, although that's not for fuel waste, but it's for highly radioactive intermediate level waste. And both that and Gorleben, did they actually put waste in? Put it in and took it out. Assay, they're still trying to figure out how to take it out. There's another failed repository in the US called Yucca Mountain. The containers started releasing much more rapidly than expected. And so now at Assay, they have a huge task of trying to figure out how to actually remove those. For the deep geological repository proposed in Canada, they don't have a plan for monitoring that would allow them to identify where the failed containers were located. And they don't actually have a plan for monitoring at all. They have towards a framework for making a plan for monitoring. The last plan they had was to have some boreholes, drop a sensor down every 20 years, take it up and read it. That doesn't tell you anything about where the failure has happened, and they have no method identified or described for how they would actually retrieve it. They say on the surface, oh yeah, we'll be able to retrieve it until the repository is closed. But I have been saying for years that I'm going to win a lottery, and I haven't yet because my plan is still a concept. So they don't actually have a mechanism for retrieving a plan, a methodology for retrieving, identifying where the failure is, or retrieving it. And so that's the later stage of what you see in something like Assay, where they put the waste down and now they have to figure out how to get it out. For the Canadian design, we may not even know that it's failed until a long time afterwards. And by then the failures could be really widespread.
Okay. So understanding the risks associated with these two sites, but then also understanding that we need to do something with the nuclear waste. You mentioned on-site storage as a potential alternative. I'm just wondering what the right thing to do is with the waste that we have.
No happy answer. The waste has been created, and there's no happy answer. There's no easy way out. The best option, so we've studied a series of deep geological repositories in detail. None of them have been able to actually demonstrate that they will contain the waste for the sufficient period of time, even without an accident. So the best we can do now is improve containment at the site. So not status quo, lots of problems with the way the waste is being managed at the site now. It has to be moved into more secure, more robust storage. Some experts talk about dispersing it, but berming it, certainly bringing it back from the lake. Both Pickering and Darlington, the waste is stored in sort of meets Canada Building Code standard buildings just in from the lake, and both Pickering and Darlington have not just plans but approvals to build additional storage buildings even closer to the lake. So they're absolutely within the sight line for any kind of malevolent acts delivered from the lake, and even from extreme weather events. Lots of cyclones on Lake Ontario. None of them touched ground on those buildings yet, but that's no guarantee of that not happening in the future. So it has to be improved storage, improved monitoring, more transparency, disclosure, at the site. And we need to stop doing this 10 years at a time racket that the industry and government has been doing since 1977. The waste is continuing to be generated, so it has to be at the site for at least 40 years after the last reactor closes. So we should stop doing it 10 years at a time, pressuring communities the way the NWMO pressures communities, and spend 30 or 40 years actually looking at how it can be contained, is there any potential for transmutation, and then look at options. Pretending there's an option when there isn't one and trying to force it into a community who are going to, both the communities are very divided and both of them are really in it for the money. And that's a tragic condition.
Hi, kind of a naive question, but what are the benefits for nuclear power? Like, why would someone actually opt for nuclear power over renewables?
Who benefits is OPG, Bruce Power, Cameco, the status quo. Nuclear workers that work for these stations. Man should begin the process now. But as the government wants to be part of the nuclear game. They started out in the nuclear game in the 40s with Britain and the United States in developing nuclear fission to create materials for the American bomb program. And from there, they moved into nuclear power industry. And as the Ford government right now is on this nuclear spending spree, and they're essentially committing Ontarians to an upwards of $177 billion infrastructure project. There's a lot of industries that are going to benefit from those billions of dollars spent in those communities. So all those industries are vying for the money to be spent this way. On the other hand, wind and solar companies, they are, they're private companies. They're not these crown corporations, mega crown corporations. And they don't have the same lobby infrastructure. Conservation doesn't have any lobby. They're really much smaller companies. And we just can't compete with the status quo industries that are benefiting from it, from the way it is. However, in non-nuclear communities, like Ontario is a real anomaly. We get 60% of our power from nuclear, and we have for many decades. And we're the second most nuclearized jurisdiction in the world, second only to France. And most countries don't have any nuclear power, and so that's where wind and solar is able to take off. Or they have different kinds of governments that are more private sector or free market governments. But have this entrenched industry, a very strong nuclear lobby that is just maintaining its existence.
Also asked me to add, there's lots of consultant companies like S&C Lavalin, Atkins, Ralis, et cetera. What I wanted to mention, I'm starting to read a lot now about the history of the nuclear industry, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I've done a number of access to information requests to hear what's happening behind the scenes. Canada sees nuclear as part of its proud history. We were there at the start of the nuclear industry. We were there, at the start, partners in the Manhattan Project. It's a source of national pride. And now to be a nuclear state, even though we're not a nuclear weapons state, we get to sit at the tables. And they actually talk about this behind the scenes. We want to be there when those negotiations with Iran are happening. We want to be there. We want to be part of this international nuclear club. We want to keep this going. And the only way we can keep this going is to keep the nuclear industry going. And it's very, very much a part of how the politicians at the highest level see Canada and what we stand for, that we are somehow a nuclear state, and that's a part of who we are. So that's kind of also this kind of psychic thing going on.
Susan, Angela?
Yeah, so my name is also Angela, Angela Keller-Herzog.
Awesome Angelas, my favorite Angelas in the whole world.
Okay, so I'm here locally with an outfit called CAFES, Community Associations for Environmental Sustainability. And I'd love to tell you the story of what happened when we tried to bring a motion to the City Council here in Ottawa. But all kinds of shenanigans and backroom dealings happen at local level. So in some ways, one of the most alarming things that I heard tonight in the presentations was that for the local deal around the deep repository, the agreement says like no access to information, no measurement, no science. And the thing is that a lot of the work that we do is on local climate action, and the environment is starting to be filled with misinformation and with, in some cases, also fear-mongering. And so if at some point we still need to get back to someone being able to measure things, to have data, to have investigation, whether it's an investigative journalist or a PhD student doing a thesis, and if there is no data, there's no information allowed, that is truly, truly frightening. So I'm just wondering if there is sort of somewhere like a constitutional legal basis for citizens to have the right to know what is going on in terms of the local ecology, local environment that may or may not be getting contaminated or pose a danger. This seems to me a very fundamental question.
Well, I'll just say that if this plutonium extraction project goes ahead, we haven't seen anything yet, because then it becomes national security. And in all the sort of literature around the idea of what's called a plutonium economy or plutonium society, it's heavy, heavy secrecy. And even the politicians in that case are not allowed to know what's going on because of the security risks. So I didn't even get into that, but that's a whole other layer of security and secrecy that will happen if this goes ahead.
Yeah, the Saskatchewan situation, the uranium mining situation, what Brennain has mentioned is nothing new. This has been happening in Saskatchewan communities for decades. These agreements have been signed such that communities must always speak out positively with regard to uranium mining and all the things that go with it. Secondly, with regard to data, at the University of Saskatchewan, we have many experts in, biology and in all the areas, and the industry will finance these scientists to go about doing their studies, and they do the studies with absolute integrity and everything. So the data is indeed good data, but they all have to sign non-disclosure agreements so that if the study comes out and shows, oh, well, yes, indeed, everything is perfectly safe, that will be released to the public. If the study comes out and says, no, there are negative effects with regard to uranium mining, thank you very much, and that is put into the filing cabinets of Cameco, never to be seen by the public. And so, again, the data is there, but if it's negative data, non-disclosure agreements make sure that the public will not be informed.
I would like to make 2 points. One is about the Algonquin people, the unceded title holders of this land, and that includes Chalk River and all the events we have described here. And it is absolutely incredible how the federal government and any other government here in Canada have treated the indigenous population when this proposal came up. The federal government did not sign on the UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People in 2007, and waited purposefully 14 years till they got finally the act done. And the act is not yet active, it's just a plan now. They have just a plan several years later. So in other words, they on purpose did not support the claim of the original population and the rights of indigenous people to be consulted and to have a say in all this. And that is all over, not only in Canada, but here in Canada, we have it particularly clear in Chalk River. It's close to our area. It affects 4 million people, about all the river, the upper river valley, the Ottawa 1 million, and 3 million in Montreal, if anything happens. And there is no, this is point 2, there is no safe place for radiation. Radiation is ionizing radiation, and that's cancerogenic, and it simply cannot be harnessed at this point in time safely or domesticated or whatever, safely stored, and no country has really resolved that problem, and yet there are industries which gain tremendous profit from this circle of creating more profit promises, and it's also each of us who uses too much energy. We have to get down in our demands. As somebody said, we have over 50% nuclear energy in Ontario. Why? Because we all need air conditioning in the summer. We all need everything to our utmost comfort and cannot scale down, so that we finally get to the point that the green powers would dominate the energy spectrum. And those are the two aspects which we are not considering. Thank you.
I just have a question with regards to what do we do now? It's great information. It's extremely upsetting for me because I'm relatively new to looking at this in a more thorough way. But what can we do besides sign petitions?
Well, there's some obvious things that I'd just really like to encourage you is letters to the editor. Get the word out there. We don't have enough people writing about it, and the easiest way to do that is letters to the editor, phone into radio shows, that kind of thing. If you like to write, see if you can get an op-ed or a commentary in. I think that would be, we just need to get the word out, and that's really the purpose of what we're doing here, and pleased that so many of you came out tonight, because we're just trying to share information. So obviously the media is the way to do that. If you do feel comfortable talking to your elected representatives, certainly nuclear is a federal issue. It's also a provincial issue, but if you feel comfortable talking to them, they rarely hear from the constituents on this issue. It's way down the list. It will definitely be noticed if you raise it. So that's what we're here to do, and we would really encourage you to do the same.
And I'd say even if you don't feel comfortable, do it. And if you see a news story, send it to your MP or your MPP. Now here's something that you can do. It's good to send a letter or forward a news article, send anything. And then if you're a little bit shy about talking to them, call after hours. It's always an answering machine. Say, I just sent you an email. I want to make sure that you received it. Please let me know. It's pressure, 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 press, 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 amplify, amplify, amplify. We just need to hot it up. I feel that we're having a real challenge getting and keeping the attention of government. And like him or not, they are ultimately the decision makers. press, press, press.
Renee, what was that website address you mentioned yesterday where people can find all the info?
If you go to nuclearwaste.ca, it's just a simple website and it's a switchboard. So all of the groups here, I don't have cafe on it. Happy to add any groups. Go if you don't see your group and you want it added. We'll add your list. And it's just a place with an easy to remember name that you can go and find the groups, and then you go to the group and find more information there. We also list, some industry and government agencies as well on that site.
And where are you?
Sorry.
No.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I
Thanks.
sat down. My apologies.
And I would say, learn the issue. And you can learn the issue by getting on our group's email list. So we're doing this full time. And if you're on our email list, you're going to be getting regular updates weekly. Follow it, learn the issue so that when it is in the news, you can respond with, awareness and intelligence. But it's also important to respond with our hearts too, because when we are meeting politicians, they always tell us they don't hear from the public. And likewise, if the media were getting bombarded from lots of people, there would be way more exposure from our point of view. At the back of that leaflet on your chair, if you send that letter to the Premier, I will add you to my email list. So that's how you get added. Brennain sends out lots of stuff. If nuclear waste is your thing, get on her lists. How would they do that? And let me just add one more thing. Organize in your own community to educate your neighbors. Distribute literature to your neighbors. I could give you free leaflets. Or organize a coffee table chat and Zoom me or Brennain or any of us. Zoom us into your church basements. Help get the word out to other people. That's so important. We only have so much reach.
I'm back. I have I guess a bigger picture question about the energy transition more broadly. It's not my worst nightmare, but it's up there, is a scenario like what Germany went through when they took their nuclear power offline and they needed a backstop for the renewables. And, Russia. But they also, they took their nuclear power offline, their renewables couldn't keep up with energy demand, and they had to reopen coal power plants, increasing their emissions.
But that was just a very blip in time, and they're on track to phasing out all of their fossil fuels as they ramp up renewables.
That may be, but my understanding is that renewables are generally pretty reliant on the sun being out and the wind blowing. And
as long as they have storage now, which
and
they are
storage,
now.
and is that scalable to a global level where you can?
Yes, in fact, 7 countries in the world are already 100% renewably powered. Another 60 countries and states are like 90 plus. The world is moving in that direction. We're not there 100% there yet, and we're still developing the technology. But as it ramps up, like I showed you the exponential growth in solar panels, they're getting better. Wind turbines are getting bigger. They're doing it slower so that they're not impacting wildlife. Batteries, the amount of battery, someone was saying today, there's more battery storage sold last year as it becomes much more proficient last year than all the nuclear.
There was more, I don't think just battery, but there was more storage created last year than all of the power that comes out of nuclear power plants across the planet. Storage is just going crazy. It's sort of like where solar was 2 or 3 years ago, but storage, it's like, I think it's expanding 10 times over a 2 or 3 year period.
And if you want to research a bit more, there's a guy named Mark Jacobson in the States. He has a group of researchers working out of Stanford U, Mark Jacobson. And they've modeled for about 100 different countries already how they could go 100% renewable, including Canada. And then the David Suzuki Foundation spent a year modeling with super serious researchers. They've modeled how Canada could go 100% renewable. And they've basically said we need to multiply wind, water, solar by 7. Actually, most of those models don't rely on more dams. They rely on efficiency. They rely on wind and solar, offshore wind. But the research is being done and countries are moving in that direction. And maybe it can't happen tomorrow, but that's the direction we need to be going. We're not even saying close all the nuclear reactors tomorrow in Canada. We're saying when they come to the end of their lives, new projects should all be moving forward with wind, water, solar, storage, bidirectional batteries, exchange with other provinces that have surplus hydropower.
Okay.
Solar panels on every roof.
The extraordinary thing right now is in Ontario, because Doug Ford stopped all of the renewables when he got in, even though they were sort of charging along. He canceled something like 700 projects, even wind turbines that were half built project. They're now ramping up gas peaker plants to fill in the gap until the nuclear plants can either be, new nuclear plants are built or the old ones are refurbished, which I'm told often means starting them from scratch. It's not really rebuilding, it's rebuilding them, not refurbishing them. And what irony that in 2024, when in the next 6 years the world is committed to cutting the carbon footprint in half, that we would actually be building fossil fuel plants to fill in the gap for the next 10 or 20 years until the nuclear plants can start be effective. And the average nuclear plant takes 10 to 19 years from imagination to fruition, which is way outside of the time frame we have for dealing with the climate properly. So it's just out of sync. It's sort of a delusion, and unfortunately, it distracts us from getting on with what we need to do right now, which other countries, as I mentioned at the beginning, are doing. It really is a huge and expensive distraction.
Okay. I guess my only follow-up, if it's even a follow-up, is there really no need for a backstop to renewables?
Oh, absolutely.
And secondly, is the northern Canada is a growing demographic. There's not a lot of sunlight up there. Their energy needs are high. I guess so. Yeah? Okay, well, if that's the case.
No one here is suggesting closing the nuclear plants that are existing before their time is up.
We don't use the nukes.
3 communities in northern Saskatchewan building solar generating facilities. The whole notion that somehow these small modular reactors are going to be able to go to these remote communities and supply electricity is simply nonsense. If for no other reason, these communities don't have $3.5 billion to put in a reactor.
Hello, my name is Nisha. I'm from the Ojibwe Nation of Saugeen, which is located in northwestern Ontario. We are actually one of the opposition communities against nuclear waste in the Ignace area. Wabigoon is actually my ancestral grandmother's, great-grandmother's homeland. Our family traveled down to Savant Lake, and then we established our homeland in Savant Lake and became the Ojibwe Nation of Saugeen. And where I'm here in Ottawa because I'm part of the 60 Scoop, so I was actually taken and removed from Northern Ontario and brought down to Ottawa and left here. But fortunately, I was able to make my way back home at 18, and then I found out all the stuff that industry has done to our people with regards to the mining, forestry, and now nuclear waste. Since 2010, I've been advocating, speaking, traveling, talking about the land, the water, our people. So today, I wanted to come here and say thank you to all the people that gathered to speak against nuclear waste, to support the people, the Indigenous communities, yourselves, pretty much everyone who coexists in the waters, with the waters, in this territory and also in the Northern Territories. I'm holding this water here because I didn't bring my feather, so I wanted to share my thoughts with the water because that's who we're speaking for and who we're helping today. So I just had one question. In Northern Ontario, like Nuclear Waste Management Organization, they're doing a lot of divide and conquering within our communities, and not just certain communities, but a variety of communities, depending on the location that they are. In my community, we passed a BCR against nuclear waste, saying that we are in opposition against nuclear waste, but they still keep coming in with their bingo games and their learn more presentations, but it's not actually going into the community. It's only going to like the 5 to 10 people that live on the reserve, because the communication doesn't extend to off-reserve people, and nuclear waste are aware of that because 70% of our people live off reserve, and 70% of our people are not being included in the conversations and the decision-making with regards to nuclear waste on reserve lands in Northern Ontario. And what they're doing is that they're coming in with their gifts, their trinkets, and their negotiations with regards to learn more monies. And I don't agree with what they're doing to our people and how they're manipulating the conversations and the dialogues. And when we oppose them, we suffer. We suffer because we get targeted with regards to ridiculousness accusations. And how do you deal with an industry who purposely goes out there to slander the Indigenous people who are fighting nuclear industry to protect the lands? And a lot of us are single mothers, we're grandmothers, and my cousin Darlene Nikan, she's been walking this will be her 5th year, I believe. She walks against nuclear waste. We joined her in 2019. We did the first walk against nuclear waste, but this year is the actual last year that we will be walking against nuclear waste, and I believe we'll be walking from Ignace to Kenora or Ignace to Revel Lake, so then we can make our stand to oppose nuclear waste once and for all. And nuclear waste needs to understand that the agreements and the words that they put on paper does not reflect, the treaty people, does not reflect the Indigenous, birthrights and inherent rights and titles to the land. As I'm a concerned citizen from the Anishinaabe Nation up in northwestern Ontario, we protest, we walk, and we speak. And I want to raise my glass of water to all you guys and say miigwech.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Neera Dukaran, and one of my hats is as a Green Party, as well as other things, a Green Party member. And I want to respond to Angela Keller-Herzog and share this, but I'm sharing it widely because other people might be interested, like your questions about the City of Ottawa. So a couple of us Greens locally, and maybe other people have done this already, I'm not aware. So we did some research, and she wrote last month a letter to Mayor Sutcliffe and every city councillor individually. And basically we asked for very well-written letter that I'm happy to share once I check with her, with anyone who's interested in helping with this. But it's very, she's asking about measurement of tritium levels, cesium, all this stuff. She knows it better than I do, and I could read bits of it. But what I found and contributed to that is in 2021, and I'll just find it here. I'm just looking at the email thread we were. In 2021, the City of Ottawa committed, there's a link right in their minutes, and I forwarded it to her, and we put this, I don't think we put this in the letter to the city, but we referenced a whole bunch of commitments they made. So there's a link for commitments made by Ottawa City Council in 2021 regarding nuclear waste produced at Chalk River Labs in our drinking water. And we were asking specific questions about how is it tested down here, who's testing it, how is that made available to people, et cetera, et cetera. We got 3 responses, one from a councillor, one from the mayor officially, and they were all kind of, yeah, we'll pass this on to the next person. And there was a person from water quality who gave us a long answer that didn't really say anything. So our question is, like, where to go next with this, but the city made these commitments, and calling them, I mean, I don't know if it's just words on paper and you can press them to hold to any of that, but there is potentially some action to be done there with pressing them to review those commitments and make good on some of them. Effectively, we're told we were effectively told the water's tested down here once a year, and then when she asked, well, can we get access to those tests? No, we can't. So it's completely opaque, right? And they made commitments that I think we could press them on. So I'm happy to talk to anybody, including you, Angela, who wants to share. In fact, earlier this evening, listening, I thought I just emailed her and connected. So, maybe cafes could help with this, because you guys are very, very active municipally and know better than she and I right now how to engage with City Hall with some force, right? Perhaps muscle. Thanks.
I don't want to scrunch down. Okay. Hi, my name is John Kirkwood, and I don't have a question, but I want to add something to the conversation. I'm a representative of Ottawa Renewable Energy Cooperative, and we build community-scale solar and wind projects. One piece of that I haven't heard about related to nuclear energy, there was a question about, why would people invest in nuclear energy? Well, there's a history in terms of organizations supporting it, but it's also for the centralization argument, control. And one of the things about renewable energy is you can build it locally, and you can be self-sufficient locally. So if there's an outage in Ontario, you could still keep your energy running. And if you think that's kind of a flaky idea, there are 40,000 co-ops in Europe. So this is a well-accepted principle, not so big here, actually bigger in places in the States and other parts of Canada. But I just want to mention, because we actually have a transmission issue in Ontario. We're going to have a shortage of electricity. And even if we had suddenly a whole bunch more of electricity, we don't have the distribution network to support it. And the government knows this. It's a problem. But I'm not trying to be negative. What I'm saying is the answer, and we've said it, is renewable energy, but also because you're becoming self-reliant and you're reducing dependency on a central point of distribution. And that's part of the issue, that's part of the problem with nuclear energy in particular, is it's a centralize and control model, and it's not sustainable. So there actually is positive steps. We can't do it overnight, but I just wanted to add that to the conversation. And for what it's worth, yes, it's a pitch, but OREC is actually a cooperative, and if you want to make a difference, you can literally contribute. Sorry, it's not a charity. It's a cooperative. So you invest. It helps us with capital to build more projects, and then we pay you dividends. So we're actually paying you to help us build renewable energy. And it's up to 3 times more efficient than putting solar on your roof. Nothing against that, of course, but just because we have an economy of scale, and wind, for example, we could be more efficient. So these are the types of things you can do to be active, to make a difference, rather than just going, no, those stupid politicians. So absolutely we need change in policy, and many people here are doing fantastic work towards that, but this is the kind of grassroots thing that also is part of the solution, I think.
I think you... I think you'd find there's probably quite a few O-wreckers in the room. O-wreckers? Come on, Angela, you're an O-wrecker, you know that.
Terrific. Thanks so much.
My name is Audrey Redmond, and I'm Dakota, originally from Saskatchewan, from Standing Buffalo. I'm also a survivor of the schools and of the 60 scoop. So I was moved out of Saskatchewan a long time ago, and I've been in Ontario since 1966. I didn't think I could be excited about a meeting like this, but this room here is filled with people that have clout. And, you know, this is where it starts, right here. And with this group of people, individually, you know, we don't have much. But all together here, it's amazing. I'm so impressed by everybody and by what you know and by what you're doing. I'm here, I'm a journalist, by the way. I'm a writer. So I just kind of gather information and see if I can put it out, and that's kind of what I'm doing. But I think really there's so much power in this room that I think you really could do something here. And I think you could move mountains. And that idea of the business, where is he? He was just speaking. I think you got like an amazing idea, because that's what I thought. I thought, you know, it's time for communities to take it back. And there's no reason why whole areas of communities couldn't do that. It's just a matter of organizing. And that's why we're not moving ahead, is because we're not organizing right. And I think that if we did that, there's enough here to do it. And I really believe that. So I really think the next level is to take it up a notch with all that's here is powerful. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I think we should wrap it up now. I'm just wondering if each of the panelists would just like to give just a 1-minute summary or some last point they really want to make. Angela, you don't look like.
Well, first of all, thanks to everyone who came out tonight, and I appreciate what everyone had to say and the ideas that were generated there. It is at most times a very frustrating and despairing kind of project we're involved in, because the cards are often stacked against us, and we certainly see that. But the kind of stubbornness and hopefulness needs to come through in the sense of, right, we cannot let them win, right? And as long as there is someone out there that speaks the truth as to what is going on, knowing that truth and people hearing that truth is the possibility for bringing about change. And again, I think that is something that we together can bring about. And I guess that would be my final word.
I'll just put in a plug for New Brunswick. We, as far as we're really in a media desert. We have very few media outlets in New Brunswick. We don't even get the Globe and Mail. They don't print in Atlantic anymore. So if you ever see a story about nuclear in New Brunswick in an Ontario publication, please write a letter to the editor and just kind of get it out there and amplify, because it often feels like we've got no support except for the wonderful people that I work with, and there is a strong network here. But in terms of awareness in Ontario of what's going on in New Brunswick. We're very much a part of everything we talked about tonight. So if you ever see anything written about New Brunswick and nuclear, please just write a letter to the editor and amplify and show your interest. Thank you.
We are in an incredibly interesting time. We are in an absolute climate crisis, but we're in a nuclear crisis. Both the decisions that are about to be made about waste are massive, decades in the making. Decisions that may be made about crazy new misadventures like reprocessing, new nuclear. The decisions that are going to be made in the coming months and very few years are decisions that are going to impact us forever. So now's the time. Now is absolutely the time. There's some saying, and if anybody remembers who said it, I'd like to know. It's not for the citizen to do everything, but to do something. But I think the other part of that saying, which that person I can't remember should have added, was, it's not for the citizen to do everything, but to do something every day. So there's always something available. Each of these issues, I mean, the nuclear waste burial scheme, if you don't live in the area being investigated, then you quite likely live on a transportation route. And if you don't live on a transportation route, you're still paying for it anyway. Ratepayers' money, Ontario ratepayers' money, pay 94% of the NWMO's budget. It's over $100 million a year, and most of it is for promotion and pressure. So press on that, but every day, press. Thanks.
And the renewables revolution is happening. We are all witnessing it right now. We might not be so aware of it in Canada because the trajectory is not nearly so steep. But elsewhere in the world, it's happening. So hold on, because we're flying through this. EVs, how many people already have EVs? Quite a few. What? Exactly. But even in that revolution, and conservation, heat pumps, the shift is, we're in the midst of it right now, not too soon. But the other thing is, I mentioned that the provincial government is ramping up investments in these massive new nuclear projects. We have to stop them before they get a foothold and are actually spending multiple billions. There is an election next year. We must not allow Doug Ford to have a majority government. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Angela has a...
I'd just like to say a couple of words. I think this cute guy who's been emceeing for us tonight, he didn't even introduce himself. This is Ken Johnson. He's the main organizer of this event. And he's truly leading by example in the sense that we can all contribute and we can organize, we can talk to our neighbors. So big thanks to Ken.
Someone who did, and I'd like to thank my audiovisual guys, my buddies, and Paul made the carrot cake from scratch today, so please have a piece. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the attention, everyone staying and being so attentive. Thanks very much.